Hi, Karen.
Hello. Sorry, I keep flashing between screens here. Let me
No worries.
pause. So again, thank you for attending this session. We will begin with John talking through the Prime Working Group on Peace and how to get involved and what that working group does. And then Daryna, who's a very active member of the group, and that's the way that these Prime Working Group tour is designed, is to welcome one of the UK and Ireland members of those working groups to talk about the illustration of those working group principles in practice. So to give a brief introduction to John, is a professor of management, entrepreneurship and strategy at the American University of Sharjah and a research affiliate at Queen's University in Belfast. He's also editor-in-chief of Society and the Business Review. And his research concerns how businesses can act sustainably, promote social value through crisis and conflict, working for which he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize with a group of business and peace researchers. So it's immense honour to be able to welcome you here today, John, and speak to us. For many years that I've been in the Prime community, I haven't had a chance to connect to you and to understand firsthand what the working group does. So really looking forward to this next session. I'll hand over to you here, and hopefully you can share your slides.
Thanks so much, Karen. Thank you for that introduction. I will share my slides right now, and then I'll do that. Can everybody see it? All right. So yeah, I thought what I would do is introduce myself a little bit, and then introduce the working group, but then also kind of business and peace generally. I shouldn't be more than about 10 minutes, and then I'll pass it over to Daryna so she can talk a little bit about her research on MSMEs in a very active conflict, and so you can see what some of the research looks like in practice. So I put this up there mostly. It's mostly a recap from what Karen already said, but also because myself and Jason McLeon, who's at the University of Oslo and was the chair for the working group right before me, it just came out with a book on ethical leadership in conflict and crisis with Cambridge University Press. And it's meant to be really a master's level book. So it's very case heavy. Every chapter, even though it's once you get into it, there's lots of academic research in it. Every chapter starts with a case, and it's meant to be engaging for master's level students. So and it's the Norwegian government has paid for it to be open access. So you can, as long as you're using the online edition, you can feel free to use it in your classes. And any help and support that you need, you can feel free to reach out to me or Jason. Okay, so my background is yeah, I'm at the American University of Sharjah, which looks like this. If you ever come and visit us, on a nice day, this is what it looks like. On a not so nice day, it looks like this, but it's about 40 degrees outside. But on a nice day like today, it's about 20. We're in the UAE. I spend a decent amount of time also at Queen's University in Belfast at Queen's Business School as a researcher there. And I'm editor-in-chief, as Karen said, at Society and Business Review. The quick plug for that is we tend to focus on issues that are more niche. Business and peace is definitely a niche area. So if you're ever looking for something that's there, we focus on niche areas and then scholarship from the global south, sort of our two focus areas. So if you have anything in that space, we're always very happy to see submissions. What I'm here to talk about today, though, is the Prime Business and Peace Working Group. So what I thought I'd do is maybe talk a little bit about business and peace, and then maybe go through the history a touch for how we started. And again, in what my 8 minutes left. We know a lot about business and conflict. So most people, when they think of business and peace, they sort of think it's an oxymoron, the way people talk about business ethics. So they often people think, oh, these terms can't possibly go together. But similar to business ethics, I think our focus is really on, we know that businesses can do bad things. We know that they can contribute to conflict. There's plenty of both historical and modern evidence of it. And similarly in business ethics, right? We know businesses behave badly. They can do unethical things. The question instead for the field is more, can we do better? Or even sometimes, can we just do less bad? To use sort of a strange phrase, but to also make clear that sometimes we're looking to simply have no negative impact rather than necessarily promoting peace, although that might be our end goal. It also is rooted in this notion of business as a societal actor, right? So what is more critical to society than peace? We may have a discussion with our folks, who are on the climate change or the poverty working group or some of the other working groups who might have a fight about it. But I don't think anyone thinks peace shouldn't be part of the conversation, right? So I think everyone agrees that it's part of it. Although obviously the business and peace folks would think peace is the highest, the most important, but I don't think anyone thinks it shouldn't be at the table. And then in the last 20 years or so, there's been a lot of empirical developments around peace and conflict, very little of which has made its way into management research in particular. So there's an entire research field that's developed around the topic. It tends to be highly quantitative, but there's also some good qualitative work. And then there's lots of other fields that are linked that are also doing a large amount of empirical work on it, specifically development economics and areas of political science and conflict research. The other reason why business and peace is that what we've found over the last 15 years is that companies are already doing it. So, or they're at least already claiming that they're doing it. So why don't we figure out why they think they're doing it, whether it actually works, and whether it can be done any better. So I thought this is there's way too much text on this slide. If one of my students put this slide up, I'd be really upset because there's way too much text. But I thought what's helpful about it is to just sort of think through the different timeline of events, and I won't talk through all of these. But it really started in the 2000s. There was a lot of peace hype around the turn of the millennium. In North America, that was accelerated by 9/11. But then globally, there was really a push towards thinking about what this interaction was between business and peace. And then the first real research on it was done by Jane Nelson, who at the time was at Harvard, and then Tim Ford and Cindy Scapani, who Tim is now at Kelley School of Business in Indiana, and Cindy's at University of Michigan Ross School of Business. That then became a couple of Journal of Business Ethics articles. And then on the practitioner side, the Business for Peace Foundation was founded and issued its first set of awards. These were meant to be sort of the Nobel Prize for business people who are pursuing peace. And there's been some overlap. So there's been some folks who have ended up winning the Nobel Peace Prize who've also gotten who've also been Business for Peace honorees. Then the Global Compact got on board and convened the first sort of Business for Peace Forum in 2014 in Istanbul. And that was where a lot of us started to get together with, and by us, I mean researchers who are working in the space, started to get together with practitioners who are also in the space, who are advising companies or who are at companies, and with folks from international organizations that were working on this kind of nexus between business and peace. That led to, again, more special issues. And then the real kind of the moment where we started was in 2016. So when the first UN Prime Forum on Business for Peace, myself and Bob McNulty, who was at Bentley University at the time, founded the working group on Business for Peace, set it up. And then I'm back as chair now after sort of 8 years of not being chair. And that's all kind of led to where we're at now. So in the last 2 years or so, a lot of the work we've been doing is on the research space. So this was a big part of what we were doing was around the Business Horizon special issue that came out, the first half of which came out this year, and the second half, which will come out next year, and the Journal of Business Ethics special issue on business and conflict. So, and I think what we're seeing now is because of the conflicts that are going on, and because of how widespread they are and how they're impacting so many different people, we're seeing much more both journal interest, but also scholarly interest from people who were not interested in it before, right? Or who are only maybe tangentially interested in it. And if you're in that category, amazing. We're really happy to have you. I put this up there not because I'm going to talk about all of it, but to just say this was really the first set of assertions, this Etzel et al. Paper. So if you're looking for one of the kind of foundational pieces, there's two I'll point you to here. One is the Etzel et al. Paper from Journal of Business Ethics called Business and Peace, Sketching the Terrain, in which they posit that there's these 4+1 ways that businesses can enhance peace. And that was sort of not really followed up, and there were lots of challenges to it over the next decade plus. Definitional disagreements, units of analysis were all over the place among empirical studies. There were really diverse levels of analysis. And then there were still some contradictory views on business and peace, right? So market fundamentalists and conflict scholars have some pretty stark disagreements about business's role. And then really empirical perspectives also being very different from some aspirational perspectives. And then that led to this Joseph et al. Paper, which just came out this year in JMS, that is really a literature review of everything since Etzel et al. And that starts to categorize things in different domains of where businesses can have positive and negative impacts, which you can sort of see here. This is borrowed from their article. So the reason I present these to all of you is if you're thinking about getting into this space, right? If you want to start the process of sort of thinking through how your research connects with things, those are the two articles I'd suggest starting with. Is that the Etzel et al. Sketching the Terrain from Journal of Business Ethics 2009 and the Joseph et al. JMS paper that came out just this year. That second paper is open access. So regardless of where you're at, you should have access to it. And it's a really great overview of where the space is right now, right on the research side, if that's what you're interested in. Okay, and I won't go through the key findings. And so I'll leave it for, are there questions about the working group before I get to back to Karen to introduce? Richard, Caroline, all good.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, fine. Really interesting. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay. I'll pass it back to Karen to introduce Daryna so we can hear about her great work.
Thank you very much indeed, John. And before moving to Daryna, how does your working group operate then? So if anybody were to be listening to this, yes, now I can see the alignment, because I think that the categorization, particularly around the domains, helped me to really understand more about how peace is represented within organizational functions, as it were. So how does a person get involved and what to expect?
Yeah, the best thing to do is to just email me, jkatsos@aus.edu. And then I'll put you on the mailing list so you know when things are happening. And then just let me know when you send the email what you might be interested in. So we have a group of folks who are really focused on research. We have a group that's very much focused on teaching and integrating peace into business curricula. And then we have a group that are practitioners, right? So people who are actually doing work in the space, but also have this foot in academia. So those are particularly our colleagues at LSE who have this sort of dual academic practitioner role. So yeah, I'd say just shoot me an email. Let me know what you're interested in. I'll make sure you're on the list. We have webinars. We're starting up the webinar series again in 2025. Those will be once every quarter. And then most of the research things I'll send out through the mailing list. And then again, on the teaching front, we have syllabi, we have rubrics, we have case studies. So we have things that, if you want access to, it's just a question of just ask, and we'll send them along.
Well,
and then again on the break.
Sorry, your volume seems to have gone a little, because the research input
side, engage with anybody who's interested. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Karen, I couldn't hear you.
That's okay. Yeah, I think there was a delay that was happening then between picture and voice. The research side of it and the research opportunities in terms of the scale and scope of journal associations seems very clear, and a really good reason to be involved with this community. And when you've mentioned the teaching applications and how to embed this within the curriculum, and you mentioned that there's resources and case studies, do you have a website associated to this, or how for a person just beginning to get involved with your working group, is that just something that you organically find out about as you go along and attend webinars, or is there a dedicated space?
So there used to be a dedicated space, but then Prime has reorganized some of its working group information. So that dedicated space is no longer there, but I have the resources. So that's why I say if you're interested in it, just let me know and we're not hoarding them. We just don't have a space for them just yet.
No.
We will soon.
It's a shame, isn't it? And so yeah, if there's anything that we could do as a prime UK and Ireland community in order to support your work and to be able to spread the availability of those resources and for people to be aware of it, because it seems a shame for us to have all of this knowledge and expertise within our prime working groups, but nobody actually able to be leveraging it for.
We just had our regional. I'm on the Middle East steering committee for the Prime Working Group, for the Prime Middle East Regional Group, and we just had our annual meeting yesterday, and it was the exact same conversation that there's it's both within region, right? We often aren't great at sharing within region, even though if you ask, people will give it to you, and then it's also difficult to with the working groups. I think Prime it seems like they're working on a slightly modified structure. So hopefully those issues will be resolved soon.
Yes, absolutely. And regarding the business applications, that the third element of the working stream, and clearly from your history, it was UN Global Compact's engagement. What kind of projects happen in that space?
Yeah, I think from the working group side, for all of these, the research, the teaching, and maybe less of the teaching, but we try to be a place where we can connect people with one another. So much of what we do on the practitioner side is connecting researchers with folks in practice and vice versa. So when the folks in practice are looking for academic researchers, whether that's for contracts, whether that's for projects with companies, and then when academics are looking to connect with practitioners for research, we try to be a sort of network broker, so we can connect between everyone. I'd say that's our principal. That tends to be our principal focus. When we first started, I think we were doing more direct corporate engagement, and that's just I think we just have fallen into a more network broker setup, because it was too much to try to go to do these road shows for company to company for everyone who has other day jobs.
Yes, absolutely. And everybody working within Prime is all voluntary, hence
Exactly,
the limitations to it all. And are there any organisations that you think are the pioneering at the front of the field in terms of positive contribution to addressing issues of conflict, peace?
I think for for-profit organizations, it's really been about how they impact particular conflicts. I don't know that I'd say there's an organization that is doing it in every, especially for thinking about large multinationals. There's not an organization that I think is doing it in every single market in which they operate. We've had researchers do really good studies about Unilever in Pakistan, or Dilma Tea in Sri Lanka, Coca-Cola in Palestinian territories, Juan Valdez in Colombia. So it's usually company country. There's sort of company to country nexuses. Myself and Jason at the University of Oslo did a big idea piece for Harvard Business Review back in 2021, and we go through a number of those companies. So we had sort of a 6-part feature available. It's still available on HBR's website, and you can sort of see through how they're doing it in particular contexts, and it tends to be very local, hyper local almost, very community driven, and it's companies that have very close contacts with the local community. Again, in all of those settings, right? Even Coca-Cola is an interesting one, because it's one that's come under fire for its relationships with, so Palestinian groups, it comes under fire for its relationships with Israel, and then Israeli groups, it comes under fire for its relationships in the Palestinian territories, because they have bottling facilities in both locations. And so it's a really interesting study, because you see how difficult it is for the folks who are managing the bottling facilities, right? Who are technically separate corporate entities from Coca-Cola, but are using the brand image, how they navigate that, and how they're able to work through what, even before October 7th of last year, were extremely difficult circumstances.
that sounds a really compelling case study. If might I ask you to send me that, and I can upload it into the resources, because that would just lead me into one final question that I would like to take this opportunity to ask, and other people in the room, if you do want to ask anything, please do take this chance and put it into the chat, or you can ask straight away. My final question will be, what do you think is the baseline absolute curriculum input that every student from a business school should have with regard to peace and conflict? What should we absolutely make sure is the bare minimum that's being covered?
I'd say the bare minimum is probably some pretty simple, I would say simplistic version of what just won the Nobel Prize in Economics. So the work of Acemoglu, Robinson, and Johnson on what creates virtuous cycles in societies and what creates peace over time versus what creates vicious cycles. There's a lot in there when you get into the details about what how businesses can contribute to really nasty situations in a bad way. And I think even a simplistic version of that is helpful for our students, even at the undergraduate level. I think for MBA students, there's maybe more space to do more, but for them, I think it's mostly a matter of, for MBA students, ensuring that they understand the local context is critical. So making sure they get some kind of curricular input about how to engage with local communities, how to do it in ways that aren't at the service of conflict actors, but rather are more widespread and connect with more stakeholders. And we're doing a lot of that in business ethics courses already, right? So business and society and business ethics courses already have an operating system to have those conversations. I think it's more a matter of incorporating in this conversation of, it's not just about some sort of broad level ethical outcome. It's about bodies, right? It's about violence. It's about people's lives are going to be directly affected by this. And it's not, some hypothetical thing, nor is it just about regulatory influence. Because what we see with a lot of the violence impacts, there's no legal restrictions on doing it the bad way. Very often when you see the Joseph et al. Paper, which I keep plugging in part because I'm a co-author, so everyone should know that. That's my implicit bias in that. But when you see that, one of the things that we found is you can do anything wrong and you can do just about anything right. So whenever we think about things like corruption, it can go both ways, right? You can do things in a way that's peace positive, or you could do things in a way that's peace negative. So I'd say it's really that. It's taking what you already have, whether it's in business ethics or business and society, and making clear that there's very direct, meaningful implications for poor ethical decisions that can lead to death, and not hypothetical death, right? Real, actual, on the ground violence. I think once people are aware of that, they maybe take it a bit more seriously. So I think that's sometimes my struggle, at least with undergraduate students, sometimes is explaining, okay, what's the impact, right? So what? And I think that's really what to do on the peace side, is to explain that there's a very meaningful impact if you do this the right way.
Utterly compelling to ensure that's the graduates of the future to go into business with that mindset of decisions that they make. Thank you. So unless anybody wants to ask a question at this point, I will give a little introduction to Daryna, who is a British Academy researcher and Risk Fellow affiliated with the Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of Oxford, a co-lead of the project Building Ukraine for All, Inclusive Recovery for a Resilient Ukraine, supported by the Oxford Policy Engagement Network Seed Fund. And I had the personal pleasure of meeting Daryna a couple of years ago, I think it was now, when you first arrived in the UK, and someone from the University of Oxford got in touch with our Dean at Oxford, Brooks. And so hearing about Daryna's important research around Ukraine, you came at that point and spoke to our London and South East network. So delighted to host you again today and hear how your project has evolved over the past couple of years. Over to you, Daryna.
Thank you, Karen, for the introduction. And thank you, John, for providing such a brilliant overview of the state of research and exploring possible avenues for future research in this important field. It's my real pleasure to be here, not the first time, and to share the findings of the research I was conducting in summer 2024. I would briefly tell you also that my fellowship at the University of Oxford covers a bit different research from what I'm presenting today to you. Within my research fellowship at the University of Oxford, I mainly focus on the displaced populations as the result of Russia's war in Ukraine. However, I'm wearing several hats. I'm also, and I still have my non-government organization in Ukraine, operating in Ukraine, which works in the field of research and then designing interventions and capacity building programs for vulnerable groups, for instance, for displaced persons or for also in the field of entrepreneurship. And this summer, we had the chance to collaborate with a number of researchers on the important topic, how the war in Ukraine impacted micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises and social enterprises. I will briefly share with you the main findings of our research. And then we can discuss with you what role small and medium-sized enterprises and social enterprises play in securing and ensuring sustainable peace. So the research I'm going to share with you is built on qualitative methods. We conducted 15 in-depth interviews with profit-oriented micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. And then we also conducted 15 interviews with social enterprises. What we looked at when we compiled the sampling of enterprises of our respondents, we looked at their type and we looked at their geographical location. So you can see here, for instance, that among micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, we had those which specialized in production, for instance, and also in offering services. And we divided geographically the Ukrainian territory into 5 main regions: Western, Central region, Southern region, Northern region, and Eastern region. The same is about social enterprises. We had a huge range of different activities. We had enterprises which worked as charity shops, for instance, or which provided services for disabled people or children, or also enterprises which, for instance, were working in the field of rehabilitation or sports medicine. The main idea behind this research was to explore the key challenges micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises and social business in Ukraine are facing within the war. And of course, what we noticed when we conducted in-depth interviews is that the impact of war is not even on businesses, and it much depends on where the business is located, especially when we talk about profit-oriented businesses, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. The closer they are to the front line or to the hostilities, the more negative the impact is. All enterprises located in Eastern macro region confirmed that it's almost impossible to continue operation in the region where they're located now. On the other hand, those enterprises which are located in southern part of Ukraine or northern part of Ukraine, where the face also such challenges as electricity shortages or missile attacks, but they are not located particularly next to the front line. They mainly confirm that they have neutral impact on business because of the modern technologies which help them to adapt and tailor their activities to the modern realities, to the current war realities. And those companies which are located in western or central part of Ukraine, where the security situation is not so challenging, actually admitted that they could see the boost in their economic activity. Because first of all, the relocation of companies, of other companies from other regions, and the boost in demand of services or goods, and also the displacement of people from frontline or from other regions to western part of Ukraine, which is considerably or much safer than other parts of Ukraine. However, staff shortage was mentioned as a real problem all over Ukraine by all profit-oriented companies. For instance, one of the companies is still located in Kharkiv Oblast, not far from the front line, says that if a station occurs, that a person responsible for a project is mobilized suddenly, these could lead to negative consequences when they would be hard for them to find a replacement. In this case, they could face the situation when they would lose the orders from the same client in the future. Among other challenges mentioned by profit-oriented companies were, for instance, loss of customers or loss of markets. First, in 2014, with occupation of Crimea and occupation part of Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast, and now after 2022, with further move of Russian troops and their occupation of partially Kherson and Zaporizhia Oblast, and also bigger territory of Lugansk and Donetsk Oblast. Those companies which were oriented at doing business in these areas considerably, they lost their profit there. Also, the decreased demand for goods and services, which is also related to the decreased purchasing power of customers, because in times of war, the priority usually change, and people tend to buy less luxury goods and cannot afford luxury goods, and people save more money than before the full-scale invasion, and the psychological state of employees and the decrease in their ability to work was mentioned in most interviews as one of the most significant challenges, which might have the long-term effect for the business. For instance, one of the businesses operating in the software development field, located in the Kyiv region, says that there have been cases when people have told the business owner frankly that they are struggling psychologically, and this leads to a decrease in performance. We tried to identify several strategies, coping strategies, micro, small and medium-sized enterprises employ when they try to respond to war-related challenges. And for instance, one of these strategies is horizontal coordination or cooperation with other businesses. For instance, if there is, what we could observe that a lot of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises started thinking about joining business associations where they could find partners, or where they can find customers, or where they can find collaborators who could provide them some supply material, who could supply them with some materials or with some services. This kind of cooperation was boosted by the full-scale invasion. And another strategy, coping strategy employed by businesses is shortening the planning period for the company's activities. It's, of course, now most companies in Ukraine, especially those which are micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, focus on short-term planning, up to several months maximum. They don't think in years. Emergency planning also is another coping strategy, and by emergency planning, most businesses mean the relocation plans, both for their employees and for the equipment, if they have it, and adaptation to market needs and the military context is also important. So some companies which could actually make this leap, make this shift from working in a civil economy, in a peaceful economy, to working in the military context, they actually did quite successful. And support for employees, here we mainly mean psychological support in the form of different emotional support trainings or psychological assistance service, sessions with a therapist is quite also common, especially in the companies which operate in the red zone, which operate closer to the front line, where employees really struggle to focus on work despite constant missile attacks and sleepless nights and power shortages. It will compare these number of challenges with the challenges social enterprises face. We will not actually see a huge difference in the list of challenges, in the list of problems. So they are more or less relevant also for social enterprises. But what we could see that the impact of war on social enterprises is much more severe, and all interviewed social enterprises, no matter where they're located, closer to the front line, in relatively safe western regions of Ukraine, experience a negative impact of the war. And all of them are struggling to survive and continue their operation. For instance, one of the social enterprises, which is specialized in producing tableware and decor things from recycled materials, admit that they had production facilities in Kharkiv and Lviv both. Kharkiv is not far from the front line. Lviv is next to the border with Poland, so it's relatively safe. And Kharkiv is constantly under fire. Sometimes there is no electricity. Sometimes people go down to the shelters to avoid being hit. That's why there are significant interruptions in work there. The same is true for northern and south macro regions. For instance, when one of the representatives of the social business specialized in providing legal advice for people in need admitted that they just plan for one day. If they have survived one day, they say thank you, and then they leave another day. And the same is true for Central and Western macro regions. So, for instance, a social enterprise specialized in wooden furniture, which employs veterans, the representatives of this company admitted that there is a huge shortage of staff and different issues which affect their business. And again, if we also see the same challenge for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprise, I mean, the shortage of staff. For social enterprises, it's much more acute because, first of all, the salaries which social enterprise is offering to their employees cannot be competitive with the salary which is offered by profit-oriented enterprises. And then, of course, the social enterprises are usually struggling at times of war much harder than profit-oriented businesses. Social entrepreneurs, also named other challenges they face, such as power cuts. For instance, some social enterprises can afford to buy generators or even solar panels, but it does not significantly make their life easier because it has significantly, for instance, increased the cost of production for them. Loss of target audience, the same challenge as for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. For instance, a charity shop which is located in Zaporizhia Oblast, the representative of this social enterprise admitted that their target audience are usually mothers with children, and a lot of mothers simply left the city just because it's very hard to stay there. So, and that's why their shop, which has lots of things for children, cannot operate at the same capacity. Lack of preferences and benefits, it's another issue which is not directly affected, which is not directly linked to the war, but which is a reality in Ukraine. There is no social enterprise category in the Ukrainian legislation. So the Ukrainian legislation states that we have private entrepreneurs and we have non-government organizations and we have legal business. I'm sorry, just a second. I'm terribly sorry. That's my neighbor, sir. So we have legal entities, we have private entrepreneurs, and we have non-government organizations and charitable organizations, charity organizations. Social enterprises can choose one of these forms and can work in either of these forms. But for instance, if social enterprise choose to work as a legal entity or as a private entrepreneur, as a sole proprietorship, they pay the same taxes as other businesses, for instance, as restaurants or production companies. And again, psychological state of employees was also mentioned as one of the challenges most social enterprises face. For instance, some of them, again, as micro, small, and medium-sized businesses oriented at profit, introduce sessions with a therapist or some psychological training. But again, because of the limitation in terms of funding, they cannot do it mainly on a daily basis. So looking into the future, how the future may look like for businesses and how peace, which we hope will be achieved one day, may look like for businesses, both for those oriented at profit and both for social business. Currently, we can see that there is a huge division line between eastern and southern regions affected by the war and the rest of the country. And this division may have long-lasting effect. It may be also obvious in how these regions, I mean, eastern and southern regions, will look like in terms of their economic profile. In the past, eastern and southern regions were mainly specialized in production of goods. And in, for instance, there were lots of factories, fossil fuels, which were extracted in the eastern part of Ukraine. If we assume that these regions cannot be deoccupied or cannot be taken back by the Ukrainian government, they will be still under the Russian control, then Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian state will lose a lot of profits which were previously generated from these regions. The same goes for southern regions, which were traditionally specialized in agriculture. So we don't know, for instance, even in case if Ukraine still keeps control over these regions, how in the future these regions will look like, what they will be specialized in, and how to restore and reconstruct these regions, whether it makes sense to just rebuild the same things which were there in the past, or maybe it's more feasible to invest in changing the whole economic profile of these regions in case if they are taken back by the Ukrainian government. Talking about human impact of the impact of the war on humans, so-called human dimension of the war. So we assume, and we can see it right now, that a lot of people will return from the war with physical injuries, with some psychological effects, for instance, PTSD or difficulties adapting to civilian life, which should be also taken into account when these people are hired or when these people are engaged or involved in the economic activity. And women who are now outside the labor market, because they are the main and the only caretakers right now, as men are at the front line. So women took on caregiving responsibilities during the war, will also need tailored support to be engaged into the labor market after the end of the war. In this regard, we can explore with you what business can do for peace. Not what peace can do for business, but what business can do for peace. And what is one of the things that can be done by businesses, and business should be encouraged to do it, is prioritizing inclusive hiring practices, which will include also involving veterans, women who are now outside the labor market, or other civilians, for instance, displaced Ukrainians who are internally displaced or externally displaced. Another aspect where a business contribution will be much welcome and is offering services that address mental health, psychological support for employees, for instance, and support the integration of veterans and displaced people, which could go beyond just hiring practices, which could be ongoing, because just after obtaining the job, a person usually thinks where he or she will live, how she or he will afford renting the place to live. And that could be also one of the considerations where businesses can support employees and can bring people back from abroad, and thus tackle the issue of labor shortage in Ukraine. As Karen mentioned, I was I had the pleasure to co-lead the project with my colleagues at the Faculty of Law, the University of Oxford, which was aimed at exploring inclusive recovery strategies for Ukraine. I'm sharing with you the QR code where you can follow the report we drafted based on several podcasts we recorded, as well as on the workshop with policymakers we organized at the University of Oxford in July 2024. And also on the website, which you can open via this QR code, you will find podcasts and you will find other information apart from the report related to this project. We hope actually to upscale this project and to apply for a bigger funding, which will allow us to do more within this topic and to explore more how recovery in Ukraine may also engage this inclusive approach, and how business in Ukraine may help to ensure that the recovery of Ukraine will be inclusive and will leave no one outside. Thank you so much. I will welcome your questions at this point.
Thank you, Daryna. I will stop the recording to give us a more relaxed forum for questions.